as we grapple with this wildfire issue and the various aspects of it. And for IBHS, the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, we really focus on communities and property level wildfire preparedness and mitigation. And you can see this is our research center located in Richburg, South Carolina. And in the center is our test chamber where we have 105 fans that we can turn on and blow up to a 135 mile an hour wind that gets funneled through this 6-story concrete structure where airport style hangar doors open in the back and allow the wind to blow out the backside. And we research wind-driven rain, hail, and wildfire, and look at the vulnerabilities that those perils present to homes and businesses, and then look at what we can do to mitigate that risk to those structures, making them more survivable from these events. And for wildfire, we really focus on that catastrophic event, that conflagration scenario where we lose hundreds or thousands of structures in a single event. And unfortunately, here in California, we have experienced way too many of those, and as well as in some other Western states. But we really look at 3 things that set the table for a conflagration to unfold, and that's drought conditions that occur at any scale that just dries out the vegetation where our typical wildfires start, to the point where the wildfire burns very rapidly through that very dry vegetation and allows for rapid fire spread. And then wind. Wind is absolutely the single biggest factor that leads to extreme fire behavior and can push the fire very rapidly through that drought-stricken fuels into the community and to parcel levels where we see that large amount of structure loss. And so let's talk about, Kara, thanks for setting the table for me on this. It's very well done. Let's talk about how that unfolds a little bit. So we have a wildfire start, and it's really immaterial what causes the fire, just the fact that it starts under those extreme conditions, drought and wind, can enable that fire to burn into the community. So that vegetation is producing embers, and those embers can travel very long distances under those wind conditions. And when they land in a community, whether it's on the structure, maybe pass through a vent and inside the structure, they can directly ignite that structure, leading to its loss. Or they can land around the structure, igniting combustible items that surround it, and then those resulting fires can spread to the homes and leading to loss in the start of that conflagration unfolding. And so as we look at the embers flowing into the community and buildings begin to ignite, at some point that flaming fire front, the main fire body of the fire, is going to burn up against the outer edge of that community. And those homes on that outer edge are going to experience the full brunt of the fire, the flames, the radiant heat, and the ember exposure. And as we begin to have structures that ignite within the community, the fire fundamentally changes from a wildfire to an urban fire. And in this context, when we're talking about urban fires, we really need to switch from looking at vegetative fuels where the wildfire is to looking at all the urban fuels that we have, homes included, other outbuildings, fences, wood mulch, anything that's combustible that we have on our properties within the community can ignite. And under these extreme conditions, they do ignite and allow for the spread of the fire between structures and from structure to structure. And so at that point, we look at really 3 pillars. The drought-stricken fuels, the wind, the ignition of the fire has set the table, and now the fire has entered into the community and beginning to ignite structures. Structure density is one of those pillars of conflagration where you have homes close to each other. Then it's much easier under those wind conditions for the flames that are now bent over and stretched out, elongated, for them to ignite the next structure, particularly when it's downwind. The next pillar is what we call connective fuels, or the pathways that a fire can travel between structures through a series of combustible objects. And that could be the house is on fire, it ignites a shed that's close to that house. That shed ignites the wood fence. That wood fence is connected to the next house downwind, and the fire travels along the wood fence right to that house, igniting it. And then the last one is the building materials that the structures are made out of. And the more vulnerable the materials that are used, the easier it is under these conditions for the fire to ignite the building, leading to damage or loss. So as we take a look at 4 different videos, and these are videos from actual fires. The embers are from the Eaton fire, the flames are from the Palisades fire, and that is how homes are exposed, the embers and the flames and the radiant heat. But they have to get there. So the embers travel long distances, they land on or around structures, they can ignite them. The flaming front can burn through the vegetative fuels, igniting combustible items like what you see in that bottom left corner, the connective fuel, which is a fire in Balch Springs, Texas. That grass fire ignited the wood fences and the sheds and the things in the backyards and led to the loss of 9 structures for a 35-acre grass fire under drought conditions and wind. And then the structure video is from the Marshall Fire in Colorado, where we have that high-density housing where the one structure that's ignited can easily ignite the next structure, particularly when that is downwind. That's the exposure. That's how homes are exposed to these fires, and that's what we need to defend these homes against. And it really comes down to preventing the ignition. During my time at CAL FIRE, I had the great opportunity to work in the damage inspection program, and analyzing that data. Once a home ignites, there's a 93 to 94% chance it will be a complete loss. So that's a very high probability, and so I think it goes without saying that we need to prevent the ignition, because there's very low probability that it will survive once that occurs. And so we really focus our research on that conflagration scenario, and you can see these slides of our post-fire deployment to LA fires and what we're seeing at the research center, that they very much mirror each other. And we really focus on looking at how to prevent that ignition, particularly that building-to-building, structure-to-structure fire spread. We're putting a lot of effort. We have a strong partnership with CAL FIRE in looking at that and burning large sheds and accessory dwelling units near a single-family home, and examining that relationship of distance and materials and orientation of structures and so forth. And then looking at that connective fuel piece of how the fire can travel to the structure and then lead to its ignition and loss. And so we have a post-fire deployment process, and we have engaged in the nation's most destructive wildfires, the Camp Fire, Marshall Fire in Colorado, Chimney Tops 2 in Tennessee, Lahaina, the LA fires, and others as well, and have written some reports of our findings post-event. And most recently, with the LA fires, we wrote 3 different reports. And the last one, the third one, we released early last December, and it's the most in-depth, detailed report of our post-fire deployment. And a big shout out to CAL FIRE for allowing us and our research partners at UL Fire Safety Research Institute to embed with their damage inspection teams on the ground within days of the fires occurring, to where we can gather this data that is very perishable. And so we couldn't have done it without you, so a big shout out to CAL FIRE. So looking at those 3 pillars, structure density, I don't think it's a surprise that when structures are close to each other, particularly 10 feet, even a well-hardened structure will struggle to survive those conditions. When you have a home that's burning close by with an extreme amount of flames and radiant heat that is exposing that structure. But when you start to increase the spacing between structures, moving that from 10 to 20 feet, that's when the building materials and the things between the structures, and I will say I'd be remiss if I didn't say at 10 feet, the things between structures, combustible items, really matter as well. But at 10 to 20 feet, the building materials in particular, if the building is built with more resilient materials, that could be the difference between that home surviving and not. And then as you go out further, that probability through the use of better building materials increases. So not only did we see this in the LA fires, we saw it in Lahaina. NIST notes it in their hazard mitigation methodology, and most recently Michael Gollner in a report through UC Berkeley examining CAL FIRE's damage inspection data acknowledged that as well. And then looking at the connective fuel piece, and we looked at each side of the structure and the first 5 feet here in California, known as Zone 0, and then look at the next zone out from 5 to 30 feet and looking at the percent of fuel coverage. And again, our definition of the percent of fuel coverage incorporates anything that's combustible. So fences, mulch, sheds, anything that's in that space is included into that percent of fuel coverage. And what we found is that Zone 0 of all the areas that surround the structure is the most critical area, and having even 25% fuel coverage can lead to 90% probability of loss. And then if you don't have, or if you have a non-combustible or low fuel coverage in that first 5 feet, that increases the good defensible space work that you also do, that homeowners also do in the next 5 to 30 foot range or Zone 1. But if you don't have good fuel reduction in Zone 0, then what you do in Zone 1 is less important. So Zone 0 is a critical area for defensible space. And so here's some things that we saw, not only in Zone 0, but in Zone 1 of combustible items. And Randy, probably, we spent a lot of time with Randy and CAL FIRE out on the Palisades fire, and he probably recognizes some of these photographs. But again, it's anything that's combustible, including things that you may not necessarily think, like the hot tub one is embers landed up against the side of a hot tub on a concrete patio, ignited the hot tub, which led to that significant damage to that structure. Wood fences, trash cans is one where the tote itself that you roll out to the street and the garbage man comes by and picks up, that tote itself is not very combustible. It's plastic. It more melts than anything, but it's the contents of the trash can. The lids can fly up in the wind. Embers can float right in and ignite that contents and lead to significant damage. So again, fuel is these urban fuels that are anything that's ignitable and combustible. And then the last pillar, looking at the building materials, and I think this is probably no surprise either, but when you start adding more resilient features on top of each other, that it increases the probability that the home will have less damage or no damage associated with it as compared to just doing one action. And so that is what we have built into what we call the Wildfire Prepared Home Program. And it's a systems-based approach based in science, our research, as well as other renowned research organizations, academia, and it looks at that system of things that protect the structure to the maximum extent possible from those flames, the radiant heat, and the embers. And it's really looking at, you see the two dials up there, it's reducing the exposure, so it's looking at structure separation distances and those connective fuels, and then increasing the resilience of the home to withstand the remaining exposure by the use of better building materials, and typically that's non-combustible materials. And so our program has two levels, a base and a plus level. The items on the bottom of the screen are designed to protect a home from the ember exposure and looks at those components that are most vulnerable to the embers from the fire. And then the items in the upper right corner add on to those base level requirements and protect the home from the flames and the radiant heat. And those other components like windows and the siding that are most vulnerable from the radiant heat and the flames from the fire. All designed to protect the home from the initial ignition. But although wildfire starts at the property level, or wildfire mitigation starts at the property level, wildfire is unique. You share risk with your neighbors. So the survivability of your structure may depend on the survivability of your neighbor's structure. And so it's critically important that we not only do parcel level mitigation, but we also prepare entire communities to withstand these high intensity fires. Because we've seen what happens when we have communities that are very vulnerable to them. And so that brings us to our second program that we have developed called the Wildfire Prepared Neighborhood Program. And it's really based on the assumptions that, through the embers or the flames, that the fire will get into the community at some point. And so we, again, want to try and stop the ignitions and then limit the spread of the fire within the community, giving the firefighters the highest probability that they can defend the community and the structures. And it's based on 4 core principles of, 1, protecting those homes on the outer edge of the community that will experience that highest intensity fire from the flames, the radiant heat, and the embers. So utilizing the Wildfire Prepared Home Plus standard, giving them the maximum amount of protection that we can. And then as we go interior into the community, of ensuring at the minimum that those homes are protected from that ember exposures. We know embers will travel over top of those homes in the outer edge and land within the communities, and we don't want that to be the starting spot of an ignition that transitions to that conflagration. We know that embers will land on vegetation, on combustible items, and ignite fires. But we, again, just don't want the uncontrolled spread of the fires. So we look at those connective fuel pathways and how can we break that chain so that the fire just doesn't lead to that uncontrolled spread again, all designed to give the firefighters and the community the best chance of defending against that high intensity fire. And so reducing structure ignitions, again, is what our goal is. We have, unfortunately, a lot of communities that are very vulnerable right now to these high intensity fires. And if we can reduce the ignitions, then we can reduce the likelihood that the conflagration will unfold. And when we can reduce the likelihood of conflagration, we increase survivability, and then we also increase the chance that homes will be insurable. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Ramesh.